I think it's safe to say that Nintendo doesn't have the best reputation right now for quite a few reasons, like shutting down the Wii U and 3DS eShops, resulting in a ton of games being harder to purchase and in some cases being lost forever. Releasing games with barely any content and slowly drip feeding more through small updates for around a year after release, something that Mario Strikers Battle League seems to be going through right now. Mass copyright claiming YouTubers who basically just archive their soundtracks. There's a lot of things that are leading them down a pretty bad path in my opinion. I think that Nintendo's old games had a lot more heart and soul put into them, especially the ones that I grew up playing. I'm not saying I don't enjoy games like Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, in fact those are exceptions to the rule, but I'm tired of Nintendo doing little to experiment and make new IPs. Instead they just release bare bones Mario sports games and occasionally port over Wii U games that they can sell back to you at £50. It frustrates me that Nintendo is so against trying new things nowadays, so today I want to send a bit of a love letter to a series that's one of my favourites, as well as one of Nintendo's most unique. You're watching an F-Zero series retrospective. I think that people forget nowadays how much of a revolutionary title F-Zero was when it was released for the Super Nintendo in 1990. Nintendo wanted to show off their new console that could sort of do 3D using a technique called Mode 7 scrolling. I'm not even going to try and explain the technical details here because I don't fully understand it, but it looks good enough to be convincing, at least whenever I play. I never think about the fact that this is just an illusion, and it looked good enough to be used in later Super Nintendo games like Super Mario Kart. F-Zero is a high-speed, futuristic racing game where you control 4 different machines, each with different drivers, in a dangerous competition to win the F-Zero Grand Prix. I just want to highlight how much I love the theming of this game. Sure, it's limited, and in later games more characters and locations will be added, with more personality and detail, and the races that we have here are never seen in game, but the 4 that we have, Captain Falcon, Dr. Stewart, Pico and Samurai Goro, or Goru, I never really knew which one it was, all lean into this old school superhero art style. Captain Falcon specifically is portrayed as the protagonist, a badass bounty hunter superhero guy, which you can see in the game's promotional material. It's the perfect of its era kind of aesthetic that I'm so fond of. As I mentioned before, F-Zero is a racing game where you pick from 4 different machines, each with different top speed, weight, acceleration, turning ability and machine power. Those first 4 are pretty self-explanatory, but machine power might not be at first. The way I see it, this is the main mechanic that F-Zero revolves around. In the top right corner of races you'll see a power bar that depletes if you collide with walls, other races and obstacles, and if the bar runs dry then... This game does not fuck around. However, you can refill your power meter by driving over one of these refill zones which are found in each track. I really like this mechanic a lot because it offers an extra layer of challenge. You need to get to grips with the controls so you won't end up blowing up or falling behind in the race. Even if this is a racing game though, you just need to be above a certain rank at the end of each lap to move on to the next race. So this is more of an endurance test slash elimination race than, you know, a race. My main issue with F-Zero though is that there is barely anything in your favour with winning, besides a speed boost when you cross the start line. The CPUs are always on your ass, and sometimes a random assortment of other machines will just appear out of nowhere to mess up your race, or just push you to the wall, meaning all the other races will pass you at once through no fault of your own. This can be super frustrating on the last lap. The refuel zones also barely refuel any of your energy at all, besides maybe a fifth if you're lucky, so you need to be extra careful in races. The track design is good though, the layouts are challenging and varied, and no track feels like it's placed too early in the game besides maybe Deathwind 2, which has this bullshit wind mechanic that pushes you all over the place while you're meant to be going fast enough to qualify. So half the time you spend in this track will just be you finicking around with the controls, crashing into walls while you desperately try and position yourself. This isn't helped by the fact that this is a Super Nintendo game, so it's controlled with a D-pad. You can only turn at one speed, which makes the harder difficulties all the more frustrating. For the most painless F-Zero experience, I'd recommend using the Fire Stingray since it turns smoothly and has the best top speed, even if it has the worst acceleration. Despite there being a few flaws here, I think that if there's one thing that you can't fault F-Zero on, it's the soundtrack. This soundtrack is amazing. Tons of catchy, fast-paced tunes to get the blood pumping as you make the race even more thrilling and intense. I really wish that Nintendo would release their music on Spotify or something, since then I would fill up my playlist with F-Zero music. This is definitely one of the best soundtracks on the Super Nintendo. All around, I consider F-Zero to be an impressive yet flawed game. It was a good way to show off the new technology. It was pretty successful as well, selling 2.8 million copies in total, becoming the 15th best-selling game on the SNES. I think it did what it set out to do considering the relatively high sales, but I don't think it really compares to what was coming up next for the franchise. F-Zero X released in 1998 for the N64, 8 years after the original. It still kind of confuses me that there wasn't a sequel on the SNES, well in Japan there kind of was, released for the Super Famicom via the Satellaview service featuring all new machines and tracks. But I gotta be honest, it looks so similar to the original to the point where I'm not really bothered about it. Pretty cool quality though. It's also really impressive to me that F-Zero X runs at 60 FPS consistently, never dropping in any frames. I think the X's biggest strength over the original are the controls and overall game feel. The analog stick makes the machine so much easier to steer. Since they go so fast, you need to be able to adjust how much you turn to make sure you can precisely get yourself around corners and away from obstacles. It's not the original game's fault that its controls were limited. It was a launch title for a system that only had a D-pad after all, but the lack of control that you had over turning could completely ruin your race, resulting in frustration. I still have fun with the original and I enjoy it as a game, but the limitations of the control department are basically the reason I don't go back to it unless I have to. I think that the addition of 26 new races is part of the reason that the game feels so much more fun to control. Yep, 26. Similar to the first game, each racer varies in their stats: weight, top speed, body, boost and grip. These 3 new stats add a lot of strategy to picking which machine to use. In the original I would just use the 5 Stingray to avoid frustration as much, but in this game I want to try all the different races. You can also adjust how much you want to balance your acceleration and speed with each machine, an insanely useful and cool feature that I've honestly never seen in a racing game before. In the gameplay department, X is also a pretty big improvement over the original. Instead of just having to rank high enough at the end of each lap to move on, now each race is exactly that, a race. You're competing with 29 other machines at the same time, so the competition is pretty fierce. There's no ranking out at the end of a lap for not placing high enough. If you want to come 30th in each race, you can. There's a lot more to think about and consider this time as well. At the end of the second lap, you'll get boost power, which allows you to boost whenever you want at the cost of some of your energy. This mechanic brings a lot of strategy with it, since you need to memorise where all the refill zones are on each track, then work out where it's safe to boost and when it's not. This addition alone makes X so much faster than the original, and I love the panic moments when you boost so much that you barely have any power left, and you just reach a refill zone before your demise. I also think that the more ambitious and dangerous track designs bring a great sense of speed. Tracks now have inclines, loops, half-pipes, tubes. There's so much more to the course design, and it makes all the tracks memorable in their own right, even with the plain look of most of them, which I'm sure was to enable 60 FPS with 30 races active at one time. I will say though, the course design doesn't really mesh well with the high speeds all that much, since sometimes stuff like this can happen. Other than that, I don't think any of the designs are really bad. All of them are incredibly solid and a lot more challenging and fair than anything in the first game. Also, if the CPUs give you trouble, you can just annihilate a ton of them with the spin attack move, which is insanely fun to pull off, and useful in the more tighter tracks like Silence 2 and Red Canyon 2. You even get an extra life for taking out 5 machines in a single race. Oh, and also, one of the tracks is literally a port of Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 64, which is insanely cool. I love stuff like this. I'd say that they did so much to improve on the original here, kind of making it obsolete to be honest, for me at least. And one of those things that they massively improved on here is the soundtrack. I think that sound-wise, F-Zero X completely outweighs the original at every turn, and that's saying something since I think both games have great soundtracks. From remakes of old tunes, to brand new tunes altogether. This soundtrack is a lot more rock and roll infused than the original, and it's constantly thrilling, and it might be my favourite OST from any game on the N64. It's full of masterpieces, and it's definitely some of the best video game music I've ever heard. Although I've been praising this game to high heavens for the last few minutes, I do think it has its issues. My biggest problem with F-Zero X is the lack of content. Yeah, it's an N64 game, I acknowledge that, but there isn't much to do besides play through the cups and maybe play some time trials. There's multiplayer, it's on the N64 after all, but because of the high skill ceiling and not being able to immediately understand the gameplay concepts of Mario Kart, it's kind of only really fun if your friends know what they're doing. Unlocking all the machines is pretty tedious as well, requiring you to beat every cup on the unlockable master difficulty to get them all, but that's more of a personal gripe. I'm not even good enough to unlock master mode, so the only reason I have them all here is because I use a cheat code that unlocks all the machines and tracks. Besides those issues though, F-Zero X is one of the best racing games on the N64, in fact, it's my personal favourite alongside Diddy Kong Racing. It was pretty alright sales wise as well, not as good as the original, only selling a little over 1 million copies, making it the 43rd best selling game on the console. That doesn't seem right. It's pretty low to be honest considering Hey Pikachu sold more, but it doesn't matter because this game's a classic and it should be played by everyone. It's a great sequel. But what happened next? Well, there was the F-Zero X expansion kit released for the N64 DD, which was basically an enhanced port of X, and there was a GBA launch title called F-Zero Maximum Velocity, but neither of these are very significant or important in my eyes. But then, in 2003, I just want to make this clear, F-Zero GX is one of my favourite games of all time, and I only played it for the first time a little over a month ago, so that's saying something. The development history for this game is actually pretty interesting. Nintendo, Namco and Sega collaborated to create an arcade board called the Triforce, which had very similar architecture to the GameCube. Sega and Namco developed the games while Nintendo provided the technology and overlooked projects. This led Namco to develop the Mario Kart arcade titles, and Sega Studio Amusement Vision, who developed Super Monkey Ball, to make F-Zero AX for the arcade, as well as F-Zero GX for the GameCube, making the game's companion titles in a way. I've never actually played AX, but it uses the same engine as GX and has some original tracks. It would be cool to find a machine out in the wild someday, but they're very rare. Onto GX though, let's start with the controls. The fundamentals from X still apply. Turning is even more precise with the GameCube's improved analog stick and the octagonal edges on the borders. With the right machine, you can precisely move yourself around corners and obstacles at the highest of speeds for all 3 laps. Drifting and sliding is a lot more useful this time as well, as in X you could only slide to the right for some reason and it would often cause you to slip out of control. Here though, sliding is more precise, letting go of accelerate while sliding will interrupt your speed, but you can basically turn any corner with no problems. You still get boost power after the first lap, you can still take out other racers, everything is still here and it works better than ever. The only issue I find with the controls though, and I don't know why this is a thing, but all of the stats for the machines are lies. All 30 pilots from X return and all of them control differently, for better or worse. This makes some of the machines objectively better than others, and it's generally agreed upon that the high in speed and low in turning ones are the best, making Hyper Speeder and Sonic Phantom the best choices for the skilled players. I like a balance of good top speed and good turning, so I exclusively use the Deep Claw. I think it's really weird that they decided to completely scrap all the stats that were balanced and worked well in X, but thankfully the real stats of all the machines have been broken down and documented online, so you could deduct which machine is best for you. This game is basically a refined version of X gameplay wise, and that's a very good thing in my eyes, since any minor problems with the control in X have completely been ironed out to make the definitive F-Zero experience hands down. The tracks are also better than ever. The power of the GameCube makes each environment look more alive than any of the tracks from before, and I'd say with confidence that this is one of the best looking GameCube games. The actual track designs are incredible, and they're the best in the series in my opinion. None of them fail to surprise you on your first playthrough, and the tracks are fully built around the controls this time, so I don't think there are any real bad design elements in them. And you can keep your top speed through all 3 laps now because the tracks perfectly complement the controls. Some are incredibly intense to race on, some are thrillingly fast throughout, and some require insanely fast reactions and adjustments on a regular. So the gameplay is top notch, but I wouldn't call it a full-on evolution for the series. I consider it to be a refined version of what was established before, GX's biggest addition is something that I would never have expected to be added to the series, but I'm so glad it was. The story mode. The story is bad. Okay, the best thing I can say about the story is that they had the right idea. It's a short campaign with 9 chapters and it mainly focuses on Captain Falcon's encounters with other F-Zero pilots as he travels to the next Grand Prix. The gameplay scenarios can be interesting sometimes, but that's the only genuine praise that I'll give here. As a story, it's not very good to say the least. The CGI looks like shit, the models look like clay, but my favourite part is the voice acting.
You stole the prize money from us last time. You will pay for that. That's a fine-looking machine you're driving, Falcon.
Falcon, you've come to die. I needn't have wasted time looking for you then. Let's settle this at the Grand Prix. Not like this. It's the coward's way. The coward's way? You make it sound so noble. I just plan to eliminate anyone who stands between me and the prize. Simple as that.
I won't lie though, the prologue cutscene looks okay. The new villain known as Deathborn threatens Black Shadow with death, I guess, if he doesn't win the next F-Zero Grand Prix. And then when you actually do win the Grand Prix, which I'm not good enough to do because I can't be Chapter 7, you race Deathborn and then he dies, and then you're sucked into another dimension where you race a staff ghost in order to save life. I don't know, this is really dumb. I do like Captain Falcon as a character, and a story mode focused around him is a cool idea. And his voice acting is actually okay most of the time, but the poor direction mixed with the extreme tone makes this one of the most laughably bad stories I've ever seen in a video game, which makes me love it even more. Shitty story mode aside, there's still a lot to do in GX. Grand Prix return with 4 cups to play through with original tracks made for this game, as well as a 5th unlockable cup containing all the tracks from AX, which is really cool since the arcade machine is hard to find nowadays unless you pirate it. Speaking of AX, you can actually unlock all the new pilots from that game that were created specifically for it by beating all the story chapters on very hard mode. No thanks. Though I do think that beating all the cups, even on the brutally hard master difficulty, is a lot more enjoyable than in X. I can't even do it though myself, so you know. In that game, anything for me is impossible above normal difficulty. Maybe it's just my lack of skill, but I find that the game will sometimes give a huge speed boost to machines when you get far ahead enough. So if you make one wrong move, it could cost you the race. In GX, however, everything is up to you. The controls are fluid, the tracks are perfectly paced, and the difficulty is high, sure, but it feels just right and never really unfair. Losing a cup by a few points is annoying, I guess, but it sparks this feeling in you to master the controls and track design further. There's a machine creator, where you can build your own custom machine using parts you unlock from winning cups and beating story mode chapters. This won't be much of a use to you though unless you beat some of the story chapters on harder difficulties, since then you get the best parts. There's also an emblem maker which was later reused in Mario Kart DS. I never got much mileage out of these additions personally, but they're cool to have. GX benefits from these additions anyway since they add a lot more personality to the game. In terms of personality, there's plenty of that. I already mentioned the dumbass story cutscenes, but it goes further than that. Each character now has their own theme song, and upon winning a cup your character will take part in an interview with Mr. X, who can ask them a question like how they feel about winning the cup or what they'll do with the prize money. And beating a cup on Expert or Master gives you the most entertaining options. And if you beat a cup on Master mode with any character, you unlock a special FMV star in that character, and these are definitely something. It's a very weird unlockable for beating a cup on an insanely difficult class, but whatever, it's pretty funny I guess. Also, as a common trend for this series, the soundtrack is remarkable. Instead of being solely rock infused like X, GX blends rock and techno together in such an incredible way. I think that the abstract course designs in this game suit the techno music really well, and while I think I prefer X's soundtrack overall, GX has some real bangers. In case you couldn't tell, this is my favourite F-Zero game and I think it's one of the best racing games ever made. I'm thankful that it's good as it is though, since GX was the end of something beautiful. Well, what happened? Ever since the release of F-Zero Climax in 2004, exclusively in Japan by the way, F-Zero has laid dormant, at least in game form. We did get 2 GBA games after GX, but they sold poorly and were very similar to Maximum Velocity. Nintendo weren't happy with the sales of GX and claim that they don't know where to take the series after GX. I actually agree with this statement, since that game was so thrilling and they perfected the controls, music, art style, track design, atmosphere. It was the perfect F-Zero experience and it made its predecessors kind of obsolete. Everything was so thrilling up to the point where I can't really think of many more ideas that can take the series further that would be beneficial to the gameplay. Nintendo wants to innovate nowadays and the lack of a good idea to bring the series to new heights is the reason that we'll probably never see another F-Zero game. It gets me even more because Nintendo still references the series quite a lot. Captain Falcon has been in every Smash game, he has an amiibo costume in Mario Kart 8, and they even made Mute City and Big Blue tracks for that game, and in my opinion, they're some of the best tracks in the whole Mario Kart series. Nintendo seems to want to do everything with F-Zero besides make a new game, and it really saddens me. Look at this cast of characters, they're all so distinct and full of personality, and you can tell that the designers had a blast when creating them all. The sad fact is, we'll probably never see any of them again besides Captain Falcon and maybe Samurai Goro. I wish that we would get another high-speed racer with satisfying responsive controls and a killer soundtrack. I wish that we could get a fully realised story mode featuring races that all the cast can take part in. Until that game releases, I can keep playing GX, but when I do, I'm only reminding of the times when Nintendo would bend genre rules and release groundbreaking games like this. I'll miss F-Zero, but I'm glad that it went out with a bang.